Nice to meet you again.
Great, fantastic. Lovely to see you.
今天我来到华南植物园科研区，拜访一位来自英国莱斯特大学的教授 Pat 教授。Pat 教授专注于生物多样性与农业遗传学领域的研究。从2018年开始 ，Pat 教授每年有2个月的时间在中国科学院华南植物园工作。
Your test?
Yes, so we do all of that. It's chromosomes. When its cells divide, it has a very different mechanism. Okay. So maybe in here is nice and shaded and
What sparked your initial interest in plant?
I was always interested in the sciences, but I felt that the biology had a lot of the major questions to address around the world, whether that's in the environment or in producing the food that we all eat. And during my career, at the start of my career, that was really where I thought the real interesting questions were, integrating a lot of data, everything from mathematical modeling through to looking at the plants, to collection in the wild, visiting wild areas and seeing what the natural diversity of the species were. So it gave fantastic opportunities all the way through, from field work through to computational and mathematical modeling with the lab in the middle.
You mentioned that your father came to China maybe 30 years ago.
50 years
ago.
Yes, by chance really. He was in the same general area of plant biology as I am, different specific areas, and he was very fortunate to actually come to what is now South China Botanical Garden, then was South China Institute of Botany in 1975 when I was very little, and he came and was discussing a lot of the work that was then being initiated on the flora of China. He also visited the associated nature reserve, actually the first natural nature reserve in China, Dinghushan, which is about 70 kilometers away from here. And there he saw exactly what diversity was there and was able to discuss how that was being examined, collected and measured, including producing the specimens that give the references for all of the flora. And we're still using the specimens that were collected from back there as references for what we're working with.
Your father is a role model.
Well, I think more the gardens are the role model, and what the research is being done here is absolutely leading in what is needed to study biodiversity.
Could you share a moment, make some impact on your research journey in the life?
Well, I think the whole field that I've been in, the real important thing has been that we actually feed everybody. There's enough food to go around in the world. And back in 1975, everybody was predicting vast famines and that we would never be able to feed the population of the world as it is now. And yet now we're at the position where no more land has been cultivated, but the crop production has increased by 1% a year, and that's actually been slightly larger than the increase in the population. So there's more food and better food to go around. Of course, the big challenge now is that that's been done at the expense of the environment. That we've produced all this huge amount of food, of which it was absolutely essential to do it, but it is very unsustainable and it is damaging the environment, whether that's producing greenhouse gases, which we will probably get back to a little bit later, whether that's from the pollution, whether from fertilizer or the crop protection chemicals and the effects that it's having on biodiversity. So it's a big change now that the population of the world isn't increasing the way it has been increasing in the last 100 years or the last 2,000 years, in fact. For the first time now, the population of China is declining a little bit. Population of countries like Japan and South Korea are declining enormously fast. Europe is declining slowly. America's, North and South America, are relatively level. Only Africa is increasing. But this gives us a fantastic opportunity because now we can change our research away from focusing on producing more food to focusing on producing that food more sustainably and maintaining the quality of the environment, avoiding having the greenhouse gas emissions and the pollution that's leading to climate change. And as well as avoiding that and mitigating the effects, we've also got to adapt crops to meet the challenges of our climate change.
And I know your wife is also working in this subject, so maybe you could share some story about your wife and how you collaborate with your wife in the research work.
Absolutely. My wife came while I was doing my PhD at an organization called the Plant Breeding Institute, which is part of the Agricultural Research Council, and she came as a visiting student while I was doing my PhD, and we met there. Then she went back to her home country, Austria, but we stayed in contact. And then after she had done her first postdoc in the United States and America, she came back and joined what was by then my lab in England, and we worked together there. And she brought some very exciting techniques that she had learned during her PhD and postdoc, and those really set the scene for a lot of the work and the microscopy work that you just saw us doing in the lab. The microscopy work, we worked together on that and made a number of very exciting discoveries or results together at that point, which really let us improve the ways that we can use wild crop diversity in breeding of high quality cereals. And at that time we were particularly working with wheat. So we were looking at how we could bring in genes or chromosome segments by crossing wild species into the wheat. So we were doing a lot of that crossing work and then analyzing and making the back crosses, analyzing the introgression of these characters. And those have really been quite very useful in ways to improve our wheat production genetically. So I was talking about the increase in crop production, and about half of that has come from improved genetics of the crop. So that's what we're particularly working on, using genes that are already there in wild relatives of the crops. And the other half has come from improved ways of growing the crop, improved agronomy, better fertilizer, better crop protection chemicals, better ways to manage the water, increasing the amount of the crop which is harvested in a timely manner.
Wow, what would you do if your wife has different opinions with you in the research work?
We very often do. No, of course we have very different opinions about some of the experiments that we should be doing and what is the best approaches to doing an experiment, how much resources we should put into things. And of course, one of the really exciting things of the whole career, which I haven't touched on yet, is the opportunities we've had to collaborate with so many wonderful people around the world, and particularly that's been China in the last few years, where we've been able to develop really good collaborations. And both of us are very keen on developing these collaborations, both jointly and separately.
Could you describe a moment maybe is very interesting or work with your wife in the research work?
Yes, I think one very exciting thing was when we were looking at resistances and spreading of viruses in plants, and There is the type of virus which is basically the cold sore virus inside your mouth, the herpes type of virus, and also some of the immunodeficiency viruses, which integrate into the genome of animals. And that type of virus wasn't known in the plants at all. So we were discussing this, and we did the microscopy, and we found that these viruses were integrated into the cell nucleus, and that really gave us a new way of looking at how plant virology is working and how one of the devastating infections that reduces crop production is being spread. And that was a new class of viruses, again with many collaborators, but it was a new class of viruses discovered in plants. And we're continuing that, and there are even more new techniques which we're using here to look at viruses that are present in crops, and particularly the potential of emerging viruses, which may come, obviously COVID is the most important that we all know about. It came out of nowhere. But a virus may come in plants which has the same effect and can affect our whole food supply and the way that crops are being produced. So we're developing methods where we can survey for new and emerging virus methods. And a lot of that work we're doing here, and we're even getting samples from the market, Chanban market here, to see what viruses might be present there.
And Pat, I know you have collaboration with SGBG for many years. Could you share some story about you and China?
Yes, yes, absolutely. Well, I've been coming to China for many, many years, and I can see huge when I first came in the beginning of the 1990s, you could taste the atmosphere, the horrible, and your shirt at the end of the day would be completely black, and all that has gone. There's been amazing strides in improving the pollution, the quality of the atmosphere and the environment in 30 or 40 years, in fact. So that's been one of the amazing things that we've seen. And then, of course, the fantastic progress in feeding people. That's been amazing to have more than 1 billion people with extremely high quality and amounts of food. And as I said, that's almost unthinkable 30 or 40 years ago. And that has been achieved because of the genetics and the agronomy growing the plant.
And what's the biggest challenge you have faced when you work with the Chinese research teams?
Well, we always have lots of fun together. We've got a very, very similar sense of humor, I would say, and I can see Ching smiling. And we always enjoy eating and discussing science over our meals together. And I often tell my students that being a scientist, it's not like being a management consultant or a car repair person where you can schedule what you're going to do for 2 hours and then you send a bill to somebody for 2 hours. All our big ideas come from when we're discussing things together, when we're sitting, maybe walking in the field, looking at things. And I think that's one of the really exciting things, and that works so well with my colleagues here, that we never run out of science and plants to talk about.
What's the differences and what's the similarities for the research between UK and China?
I think nowadays the environment has become very, very similar. It's a very international research project we're working on. Our aims and we publish in journals that are very similar. So I think there's been a coming together of the ways of looking and discuss science. Of course, the old science is incredibly important as well. And actually, I was just discussing yesterday some of the work from Li Shizu. It's 1,500 years ago in China. And he was involved with selection of improved animals and also in how to grow crops. And he knew all about crop rotation, of rotating from growing a legume, a pea or bean crop, and then growing a cereal the next year. So there's thousands of years of history that we're building on in what we are doing in our research. And I think that's part of the shared heritage that we in England and here in China are building our research projects together on.
How do you think about the significance of the global collaboration in current?
Well, the climate change and the environmental challenges, it's something that we all need to work together on. And this is really exciting. It transcends, of course, far beyond anything political, because it is purely for the benefit of the people that are working in the work. We work together to solve the global challenges.
Currently, what's a key subject for you to research?
We have two very strong projects in China. One is with the oat crop, avena, which is a relatively small cereal crop, but it's one which is nutritionally very important. Some people regard it as a superfood, and in Europe and the US, the legislation is very strict on what can be advertised as a healthy food, and oats is one of the crops that can do that. So with the research project here, we are looking at how oats has arisen, how it's evolved, what its wild relatives are, and developing a complete picture of the genetic diversity and how that's come together within the crop. We have a second significant group of projects here, and that is around the banana crop and its wild relatives once more, many of which occur in China. And one of the problems, for example, in banana is that it doesn't grow outside the very warm tropical areas, and yet close relatives to it will grow in Yunnan, for example, where there's snow and frosts regularly, so it's called the snow banana. And we've been looking at those, and both looking at the genes and the genome structure, the organization of all of the genetic information in those, to see how that can be used for improvement, and also to ensure that the diversity is conserved in the areas where the wild species are growing. There's also disease problems in banana, and there are some devastating diseases, particularly a Panama disease or fusarium wilt, which is destroying large areas of plantations, making them uneconomic, and we're working on some of the genes that are involved in that and how we can transfer those from wild relatives.
What's the biggest challenge for the plant genetics industry?
The biggest challenge is reducing the environmental impact and coping and adapting to the challenges of climate change. And of course, that's what we were doing when we were discussing together in COP in Baku with the United Nations Convention on Climate Change, all the ways that we can both mitigate and adapt to that. And I want to ensure that the agricultural system, which uses about 60% of the land of the world, plays a very major role in that. So with SCGB and with our own work, we're trying to influence policy to ensure that those changes are fully adopted at the treaty, United Nations and international level. Of course, China had the biggest presence at the COP conference, so that was really exciting to see the fantastic displays there with both the mitigation and the adaptation. But I would have liked to have seen more about plants.
How the plant genetics research contribute to the following worldwide issues, for example, the food security, the climate change, and the sustainable issues?
Well, I think that we can reduce inputs into the crops, particularly reducing the use of pesticides, and by having genetic resistance to the diseases. So very often you will find either varieties or wild relatives which are resistant to diseases, and then you can introduce those genes either with genetic modification or gene editing or crossing techniques, the latter which I've been mostly involved with. There's also the importance of keeping the crop healthy with drought and salinity, and that's one of the projects that we have here, is to how is gene expression changed under salinity, and how can we make particularly oat crop, for example, more resistant to growing in saline environments. And that goes into understanding how it can be used for drought tolerance and better usage of the world's water, because water is one of the challenges that agriculture is facing, that there isn't enough fresh water, so we need to breed crops which better survive under poor conditions, low amounts of water.
If you could choose one plant to symbolize your journey of life, which plant would it be?
I think it probably would be the banana at the moment, because that is the world's favorite fruit. More bananas than any other fruit are eaten around the world. It's sometimes the very first solid food that babies will eat. And of course it comes with this wonderful environment-friendly packaging with its own skin. And it's something where the crop, despite being a fresh product, the chain of transport, harvest and transport means there's actually remarkably little loss of it. So food waste is a huge challenge. Bananas, relatively little food waste despite the difficulties of transport and the ease of bruising it and so forth, but coming in its own skin is a very good way to preserve it. But there's many interests in the wild relatives, and in fact in Africa, particularly in Ethiopia, it's not the fruit of the banana, the wild species, but the starch extracted from the whole plant is used as a staple food in many parts, called enset or bulla, and people will eat a lot of the banana as well instead of a rice or maize or potato as a starchy component of their meals. So in India you will get a banana instead of rice cooked to eat on a banana leaf plate, another useful usage of the banana plant.
Maybe you can have another name, Professor Banana.
Yes, that's right. I've
Because
certainly
you-
been called that at some times. Yes,
Oh, really?
I'm a real evangelist for saying how wonderful the banana and its wild relatives are. And we will go and look at some of the wild relatives in a few minutes, I hope.
Yeah, Professor Banana can be easily remembered by
Yes.
the public.
Yes, that's
Yes. Share some hobbies, interests, or some activities which have influenced your professional life.
Well, of course, I love the natural environment. So all the holidays from when I was a baby have been spent in the natural environment, camping, going to see many of the wild areas, and I've always enjoyed that, and I still do. And fortunately, my children now enjoy that as well, and we all spend a lot of time outdoors and a lot of time in wild environments, whether those are tropical, in rainforests, or whether those are in Alps or in high mountains at 3,000, 5,000 meters even. So we enjoy going to see all these environments and of course look at the plant diversity and think how the plants are adapting to those extraordinary environments, to us anyway, where we couldn't imagine living. They're there growing, producing oxygen, reproducing and so forth.
Could you have some advice to give to the young scientist?
It's to be driven by curiosity. Always think about what you're doing. Don't think about just planning what I'm going to do in this hour on next Wednesday or whatever. Think about how you can, your big questions, keep those in mind. But of course, the think globally, act locally, act individually is a very useful mantra. So keep the big picture in mind. Use your curiosity, read very, very widely, and think about everything which you're doing. So when I go out for a meal with students, with new students, I will often ask them to say, how many species, how many different families of plant do we have on our plate today? And if we have a boring meal, we might only have 4 or 5. But if we have a super meal, we might get up to 30. And then you can debate as to whether somebody will then decide, I'm going to be clever, I'm going to order coffee. And that will add a new one to everything that we're eating. But that's the sort of curiosity drive that I like to encourage in students. And, I gave a public lecture in Dinghu early in the year, and that was great fun talking to 4 students from schools that are all thinking of what they're going to study in university or what career they're going into. And I really hope that seeing the excitement of what we've been working on with SCGB and the Dinghu Reserve will stimulate some of them to come into our research area.
Wow, it's fantastic. Maybe your speech can make more young students to be the scientists in the future.
Well, I hope that they will all be involved in thinking about how to improve our environment and improve the standard of life for everybody.
Could you have a summary? What's the core value or principles you guide your work and life in your life journey?
Well, my university where I did my PhD was actually founded nearly 750 years ago, and they said that it was a place of education, learning, ethics, and research. And those are all core values that are still very important. Education, of teaching the next generation, who will hopefully take us much beyond where we are now, of learning from the knowledge that our progenitors, that our ancestors have learned, and then research of moving that forward. And of course, doing that in an ethical framework is very important to teach people, because so many people think that all they're doing is following the laws, they're making money, they're then going off on fancy holidays to beaches or whatever. But those aren't the most ethical. It's having a real framework that you're doing things to improve the life and work together with everybody. So I think those are very important parts that I try to instill in our students and collaborators.
Yeah, wow. Thank you so much. Yeah, there's so many good points. And
Well,
thank you
it's
for sharing your
fantastic
insights.
to talk to you in this wonderful environment. And I hope that some of the bird song that we're listening to is coming over.
Yeah, and one bird is singing. I just heard of.
Yes, but I also last night walking back through the gardens, we don't have the frogs in the daytime, but in the evening there's a cacophony of frogs. And I even
I have the record
record
you
it.
sent
Yes,
to me.
yeah,
I can input in the documentary.
这是 Pat 教授发给我的蛙名。当他夜晚从实验室回到宿舍，这些青蛙便为夜色中的科学家轻声合唱。Pat 教授，这位穿梭于热带雨林与数据模型之间的植物遗传学家，从父亲的启蒙到妻子的同行，他用一生回应这个问题：我们如何与地球共处？从一株香蕉到一粒燕麦，从田野到实验室，Pat 教授用脚步丈量科学的温度。他相信，教育与伦理不只是知识的延展，更是对人类与自然的承诺。谢谢您，Pat 教授。我们看见了一位科学家最温柔而坚定的模样。未来值得我们继续向前。